Good afternoon. I'm Eric Nelson, the Acting Director of NTIA's Institute for Telecommunication Sciences. It is my pleasure to welcome you to ISART 2022, Evolving Spectrum Sharing Regulation Through Data, Science, and Technology-Driven Analysis and Decision-Making. ISART is a science and engineering discussion-based conference that brings together leaders in government, industry, and academia, both domestic and international, for the purpose of forecasting the development and application of advanced radio technologies. We were originally planning to have ISART in person this year because we recognize the immense value for networking that provides. But COVID-19 and all its variants gave us pause. It turns out that the latest variant finally made its way to Colorado, and the Boulder area is presently experiencing high rates of transmission. So in hindsight, going virtual was a prudent decision. That said, I'm pleased to announce that ISART 2023 will return to an in-person format by hook or by crook. We are already in the initial stages of planning, as it will be coordinated with ITU Radio Communication Sector Study Group 3 Working Party meetings. Naturally, given that audience, the topic will be radio wave propagation. With the fully virtual format of ISART 2022, there are only a few logistics to cover. This year's sessions will be spread out over 4 half-day-long sessions, which is more digestible considering we're not all sequestered away from the office. Note that the schedules for each day are staggered, though. Those are posted on both the Zuddle platform and the ISART website. Also, in the interest of time, panel moderators will only be making brief introductions. There is a link from the platform lobby to the ISART website where you can find biographies for all of our speakers, and we encourage you to do so. One reminder is in order. If you haven't done so already, please review the tutorials. You can access them from the banner at the top of the Zuddle page. These provide background information, which is of particular value to those who haven't been working in this space for long. I'll have more to say on that topic in a moment. What I'll call the modern era of ISART began in 2010. And that was something that Mike Cotton really had played a large role in. Recognizing that technology itself is just one piece of the puzzle, we bring together a broad audience that impacts decision-making, including engineers, economists, and policymakers drawn from academia, industry, and government, both domestic and international. There are already a number of excellent conferences that address spectrum sharing technologies. They typically solicit papers covering a number of key subject areas. Owing to NTIA's policymaking role, ISART instead centers around a number of key themes. To focus the discussions, the Technical Planning Committee has already taken the liberty of outlining what we believe to be the foremost challenges in spectrum sharing. In some instances, we go so far as suggesting strategies or solutions. Here's how we're going to address those. Panelists, at the end of your session, be prepared to offer recommendations. Organize your thoughts along these lines. A, we have a well-developed idea or solution to the problem, and community consensus is possible in our mind. B, we have a well-developed idea or solution to the problem, but doubt that community consensus is possible. C, perhaps the idea has promise, but more research or input is needed. In that case, consider who might do that work: the academic community, existing stakeholder groups, existing federal advisory committees, or perhaps we should leverage organizations with existing or new funding sources. And finally, D, no good solutions or ideas are apparent. Hopefully we don't run into that one too often. Participants, your role is to serve as our graduate committee members, so to speak. In preparation, please spend some time familiarizing yourself with read-ahead materials and tutorials. As we proceed, tell us if we're on track. For example, that's a great idea because, and fill in the blank. Give us the depth and detail. This isn't Twitter, so we're not limited to 140 characters. So if you can really explain your ideas, all the better. Alternatively, you might say, I wouldn't recommend that approach because, again, fill in the blank. You give us the depth and detail. Finally, if you're confused or concerned, ask a question. Using the Zuddle platform, enter your questions or comments in the chat window. Feel free to tap those out as they come to mind. In the background, each panel will have a curator who will review your inputs and queue them up as the discussions evolve. You can also upvote queued questions you would like to hear the panel address. By the way, if you aren't comfortable posting your thoughts for everyone to see, and we understand there are plenty of reasons why that might be the case, feel free to drop your thoughts, reactions, comments into a private chat to me, and I'll collect those. Also, feel free to provide feedback on our themes. Rest assured, if we can't address your input during the sessions, we will be reviewing them throughout and following the conference. Finally, following the conference, we will send out a request for feedback, so that would be another opportunity for you to weigh in, perhaps in more detail then. Our hope is to outline a proposed strategy based on the week's deliberations, so we want to hear from you, particularly if you think we're on the wrong track. That said, a quick survey of ISART topics in the modern era that started with Mike Cotton back in 2010 shows that we have a darn good batting average, and we're not just getting on base, so to speak, we're often driving in runs. The announcement of the FCC's 500 megahertz broadband plan spurred ISART 2010, spectrum sharing, which set the stage and put what is a very broad topic in context. Even a cursory examination of NTIA spectrum chart was enough to motivate ISART 2011, spectrum sharing between telecommunications and radar systems, since it was obvious that radar bands would have new occupants. That conference brought together two communities that historically hadn't engaged each other. Recent events surrounding radio altimeters simply reinforced the need for more of that. By 2012, dynamic spectrum access was capturing the headlines, so that year's ISART explored approaches for real-time federal spectrum sharing. The new incumbent informing capability follows along those lines. The AWS-3 auction was inspiration for ISART 2015. The Commerce Spectrum Management Advisory Committee working groups that hashed out the technical details for the rulemaking did great work. But we didn't tackle all the details before the auction. So ISART 2015 focused on measurements, models, simulations, and technologies for improved spectrum sharing. Not being able to dot all the I's and cross all the T's before auctions is a recurring theme. So this year's ISART will consider how to apply knowledge and lessons learned since then to update our strategy. ISART 2016 looked at spectrum forensics, and it addressed monitoring, identification, and mitigation of harmful interference. The recent kickoff of the DISA DSO-sponsored NASTN CBRS Sharing Ecosystem Assessment Program is a tangible example of those ideas being put into practice. With ISART 2017, we looked at spectrum mining at millimeter waves, digging for capacity. That conference explored millimeter waves, the technical challenges they present, and applications that use them. ISART 2018, navigating propagation challenges for ultra-dense wireless systems, addressed the weaknesses of existing propagation models in dense urban environments. As I mentioned earlier, ISART 2013 will revisit radio wave propagation. I'll make a bold prediction. Engineering students contemplating graduate level work in radio wave propagation will have long and fruitful careers, and 2023 won't be the last ISART that addresses the topic of radio wave propagation. Rounding it out, ISART 2010 5G spectrum in a zero trust environment re-examined what spectrum security means. That brings us to this year's topic, evolving spectrum sharing regulation through data, science, and technology-driven analysis and decision-making. The goal for ISART 2022 is to chart a technical roadmap and gain consensus for specific data science and technology-driven means to evolve and expedite spectrum sharing analyses and decision-making, and identify opportunities for continuous improvements and developments beyond the current linear spectrum sharing process. Over the next 4 days, we will be systematically walking through the topic. Today, we'll get a high-level overview. We'll hear from the Assistant Secretary of NTIA, Alan Davidson, who can speak to the administration's perspective and strategy for spectrum. Then our opening panel will bring together the ISART chairs and members of the Technical Planning Committee to explain the motivation behind this year's theme and the impetus for the goal of the symposium. Next, we'll hear from Charles Cooper, NTIA Associate Administrator, Office of Spectrum Management. Having served at the FCC and now overseeing federal spectrum management, Charles has a wealth of knowledge on this topic. Finally, today we'll hear from industry. In the lessons learned from spectrum sharing panel, we'll get candid feedback from practitioners on the commercial side who have been putting these principles into practice. The goal is to glean suggestions on how we might enhance, expedite, and improve our processes going forward. On Tuesday, we'll look at economic factors. Starting off, we'll have a keynote on spectrum auctions by Evan Kurl, Senior Economic Advisor, Office of Economics and Analysis at the FCC. Historically, our next panel, Economics of Spectrum Sharing, would have a pre-auction focus. However, there are a lot of indications that we're selling ourselves short with that approach. This panel will also consider adapting our rules and technologies after systems are initially deployed to yield greater efficiencies and greater confidence in the means to protect critical systems. We'll round out the day with a panel on data sharing and transparency. This is a tough one. Optimal spectrum sharing feasibility studies are based on accurate assumptions and understandings of system performance, network density, and transmitter and receiver characteristics, for example. Some of that information is proprietary or sensitive. Some of it is not yet known, yet all of it is essential. On Wednesday, we'll change gears and consider risk assessment and modeling. Opening the day, we'll have a keynote address on cost-benefit risk related to national security by Fred Moorfield, Deputy Chief Information Officer, DoD-CIO. Fred has been working in this space for a long time and is an innovative leader, so we look forward to hearing his thoughts on the topic. The next panel brings statisticians into the fray with a consideration of risk-informed interference analysis. This topic will be covered in two complementary panels. The first will provide a broad introduction to the topic as it's applied in other fields. In the second, spectrum experts from industry and government will consider how risk-informed analysis can be applied to spectrum management. Then we'll have a panel on model standardization. We can't afford to reinvent the wheel with every new rulemaking. There have to be building blocks we can reuse, not only because it saves time, but because with time and experience, we gain greater confidence in them. Models come in many forms, but we believe the most benefit can come from tackling propagation models first. This panel will consider how to enhance and standardize them and gain stakeholder acceptance. Finally, we'll close out on Thursday with final considerations and a wrap-up. John Chapin, Special Advisor for Spectrum with the National Science Foundation, will kick us off with a presentation on fast interference management. That day's first panel will consider technical enablers for evolving regulatory processes. Post-auction rule changes can introduce uncertainty, which represents economic risk. That said, if the technology and the framework for assessing it is well engineered and can be demonstrated, maybe it's possible we may actually yield greater confidence. Finally, we've given the closing panel a different name, the wrap-up/roadmap panel. The panel moderators will summarize the most important takeaways from each of the discussions, consider whether community consensus is possible. As I mentioned earlier, we want to come out of ISART 2022 with input that can be translated into recommendations and actionable research topics. So we're looking for everyone's active engagement at that point. The symposium chairs and technical planning committee will have more to say on the motivation for this framework shortly. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce NTIA's new Assistant Secretary, Alan Davidson, who joined us in January. On day one, Alan got engrossed in helping kick off NTIA's broadband program, and that program is coming along well, and he'll have an update for us on that groundbreaking work. We've only been working together for 5 months now, but that's enough time for me to glean Alan's leadership style and begin to understand his vision for the agency. First, he values and models excellence, integrity, and kindness. I've seen that firsthand, especially in how he actively listens, questions and encourages, and acts to support our work. When you think about the work that needs to be done in spectrum management, protecting mission-critical systems and services while expanding commercial access, we know we're going to butt heads at times. If we all take that approach, excellence, integrity, and especially kindness, we will do well. I would characterize Alan's approach as one, he doesn't use the adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's not in his vernacular. He's more likely to say, okay, it isn't necessarily broken, but I'd like us to make it better. At the highest level, that's the whole point of ISART 2022. We've been tackling complex spectrum issues for some time now. Given all of our lessons learned, we know we can do this more efficiently and effectively. In light of our virtual format, Alan suggested we liven things up a bit. So in lieu of a keynote address, we'll have a fireside chat. Joining him will be NTIA's former Deputy Assistant Secretary, Anna Gomez, who is a partner at the law firm Wiley Ryan. Please join me in welcoming Alan and Anna.